The bullet grazed past Dalton Drake's ear so close, he felt the heat of it, and he knew right then that Jake Holloway would kill him before sundown if he did not run. The June heat of 1883 pressed down on the Mojave Desert like a furnace, waves of it shimmering off the cracked earth as Dalton spurred his mare away from the rest of the Holloway Gang, his heart hammering against his ribs with the knowledge that he had finally crossed a line he could not uncross. Behind him, Jake's voice roared through the dry air, ordering the others to let him go, calling him a coward and worse, but Dalton did not look back. He had refused to burn down the Henderson farm with the family still inside, had actually aimed his gun at Jake when the man struck a match, and now he was a dead man riding if any of them caught up to him alone. The sun beat mercilessly as Dalton pushed his horse hard across the desert scrubland, heading west toward the mountains where he hoped to lose them in the rocky passes. His canteen was half empty, and his supplies were back at camp, but staying meant dying, so he rode until his mare's flanks were dark with sweat and foam gathered at the bit. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that matched the desert sand, he had put enough distance between himself and the gang that he could no longer hear the thunder of pursuing hooves. Still, he did not slow until full dark had fallen and the temperature dropped from scorching to merely warm. The stars were bright and cold overhead when Dalton finally saw the light. It flickered in the distance, a single warm glow against the black desert night, and though every instinct screamed that it could be a trap, his horse was stumbling with exhaustion, and his own lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. He approached slowly, hand on his gun, and gradually the light resolved itself into a small homestead, a simple wooden structure with a barn beside it and a corral holding a couple of horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the single window he could see the movement of someone inside. Dalton dismounted and led his mare toward the house, his boots crunching on the sandy ground. He was 10 feet from the door when it opened, and a woman stepped out onto the small porch with a rifle leveled directly at his chest. Even in the dim light spilling from behind her, he could see she was young, probably not much past 20, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that assessed him with the kind of wariness that came from living alone in hard country. "That is far enough," she said, her voice steady despite the weapon she held. "State your business." Dalton raised his hands slowly, showing his palms. "I mean no harm, miss. My horse and I are both about done in. I was hoping I might water her and fill my canteen, and then I will be on my way." The woman did not lower the rifle. Her gaze moved over him, taking in his dusty clothes, the gun at his hip, the worn saddlebags on his exhausted horse. "You running from something?" There was no point in lying. "Yes, madam. The law or something else. Something else." She was quiet for a long moment, and Dalton could see her weighing the risk of him against whatever code of honor she held about turning away a man in need. Finally, she lowered the rifle slightly, though she kept it ready. "There is a pump by the barn. Water your horse, fill your canteen. Then come to the door. That is kind of you, but I do not want to impose further. Outlaws eat supper too," she said, and there was something almost defiant in the way she said it, as if she were arguing with herself as much as stating a fact to him. "You look half-starved." "I will not have it said that I turned a man away hungry, even if he is running from trouble." Dalton felt something catch in his chest at her words, at the simple human decency of them after the years he had spent with men who would rob a widow and laugh about it. "I am not sure I qualify as an outlaw anymore, madam, but I am grateful." He led his mare to the pump and worked the handle until cool water gushed out into the trough. The horse drank greedily, and Dalton filled his canteen and drank deeply himself, the water so cold and clean it made his teeth ache. He unsaddled the mare and rubbed her down with a piece of sacking he found hanging on a nail, then put her in the corral with the other horses where she could rest. By the time he returned to the house, the woman had gone back inside but had left the door slightly ajar. Dalton knocked gently and pushed it open. The interior was simple but clean, with a cookstove against one wall, a table with 2 chairs, and a bed in the far corner partially hidden by a curtain. The woman stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled like heaven. She had set the rifle within easy reach, but not in her hands, a compromise that said she was willing to trust him enough to feed him but not enough to forget she might need to defend herself. "Sit," she said, nodding toward the table. "It is just stew, nothing fancy." "Stew sounds like a feast right now, madam." Dalton removed his hat and took a seat, suddenly aware of how filthy he was, covered in dust and sweat and probably smelling like his horse. "I apologize for my state. It has been a rough few days. I can see that." She ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, along with a plate of cornbread that looked fresh baked. She sat across from him, and in the lamplight he could see her more clearly. She had a strong face, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with delicacy and everything to do with character. Her eyes were gray-green, and there was a firmness to her jaw that suggested she did not back down easy. "My name is Laura Monroe. This is my land. Dalton Drake." He picked up his spoon but paused before eating, waiting to see if she would start first. When she did, he followed suit, and the first bite of stew nearly made him groan aloud. It was simple food, beef and vegetables in a rich broth, but after days of hardtack and jerky it tasted like something from a fancy hotel restaurant. "This is wonderful, Miss Monroe. Thank you. You are welcome." She ate with the efficient movements of someone used to eating alone, but her eyes kept returning to him, curious despite herself. "Are you hurt?" "No, madam. Tired and thirsty, but not hurt." "What are you running from?" Dalton set down his spoon, knowing he owed her some version of the truth. "I rode with a gang. The Holloway Gang, if you have heard of them. I rode with them for 3 years, and I am not proud of it, but I needed the money after I lost my family's ranch to the bank. We robbed stages and banks, and I told myself it was not so bad because we never killed anyone, and we only took from those who could afford to lose it. But today, the leader wanted to burn down a farm with the family inside because the man had seen his face during a robbery. I could not do it. I aimed my gun at my own gang leader and told him I would shoot him if he lit that fire. So now they want me dead and I am running." Laura studied him across the table, her expression unreadable. "You could have just left. Why threaten him?" "Because he would have burned them anyway, and there were children in that house." Dalton met her eyes. "I have done things I am not proud of, Miss Monroe, but I never killed anyone, and I was not about to start with babies." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slightly as if he had passed some test she had been administering. "How far behind you are they?" "I do not know. I rode hard for hours. They might have given up or they might be tracking me still. I will leave before first light so I do not bring trouble to your door." "Where will you go?" "North, maybe, Colorado or Wyoming. Somewhere I can start over." He realized how pathless that sounded, how much like a dream that would probably never come true. "I have been saving money." "Not much, but enough to buy some supplies and maybe rent a room until I can find honest work." Laura took a piece of cornbread and broke it in half, chewing thoughtfully. "It is not easy to outrun a reputation in this country. The telegraph moves faster than horses now. I know, but I have to try." They finished the meal in silence, and when the bowls were empty, Laura stood and collected them, carrying them to a basin near the pump. Dalton rose as well, unsure of the protocol. I should bed down in your barn if that is all right. I will be gone before you wake. The barn is fine." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression had softened slightly. "There is a box of medical supplies out there if you need it. Help yourself to the water pump in the morning." "Thank you, Miss Monroe. You have been kinder to me than I deserve. Maybe." She picked up the rifle and held it loosely at her side. "Or maybe you are exactly the kind of person who deserves kindness. Good men can make bad choices when they are desperate, Mr. Drake. I have seen it before." The way she said it made Dalton wonder what her story was, what had brought a young woman alone to a homestead in the middle of the Mojave Desert, but he did not ask. He simply nodded, put on his hat, and headed out to the barn. The barn was clean and well-maintained, with fresh hay in the loft and tools hanging neatly on the walls. Dalton climbed up to the loft and made himself a bed in the hay, too tired to even remove his boots. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the horses moving in the corral and the distant cry of a coyote, and thought about Laura Monroe's gray-green eyes and the way she had said outlaws eat supper too, as if she were reminding herself that mercy was not weakness. He woke before dawn to the sound of someone moving below. Dalton sat up quickly, hand going to his gun, but it was just Laura, filling a bucket at the pump. She glanced up at the loft and saw him watching. "I am making coffee if you want some before you go," she called up. He climbed down the ladder, brushing hay from his clothes. The pre-dawn air was cool, almost cold, and the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. "Coffee sounds good, thank you." They walked back to the house together, not speaking, and Laura poured 2 cups of strong black coffee from the pot on the stove. Dalton sipped his gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through him. He could see Laura more clearly now in the growing light, could see the weariness around her eyes that suggested she did not sleep as well as she might want people to think. "Can I ask you something, Miss Monroe, I suppose? What is a young woman doing alone out here? This is hard country and dangerous." Laura wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, staring down into the dark liquid. "I am a widow. My husband, Thomas, and I filed a claim on this land 2 years ago. He died 6 months after we built the house. A rattlesnake bit him while he was working in the field, and by the time he made it back here, there was nothing I could do. I have been running the place myself since then. I am sorry for your loss, so am I." She looked up at him. "But I am not leaving. This land is mine, paid for with his life and my work, and I will be damned if I let anyone drive me off it." There was steel in her voice, and Dalton believed every word. "How do you manage alone?" "I have a good well, decent soil for a garden, and enough water to keep some chickens and a milk cow. I can shoot well enough to bring down rabbits and the occasional deer. Once a month I take eggs and vegetables into Mojave, California, which is about 12 miles east, and trade for supplies. It is not easy, but it is mine." Dalton nodded slowly. He could see it in every line of her, the fierce independence, the determination not to be a victim of circumstance. It was something he recognized because he had lost it himself when he joined the Holloway Gang, that sense of being his own man making his own choices. "You should go soon," Laura said quietly. "If your gang is tracking you, you do not want to be here when the sun is up." "You are right." Dalton set down his coffee cup and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. He set it on the table between them. "This is for the food and shelter. I know it is not much, but it is honest money, saved from before I fell in with Holloway." Laura looked at the pouch but did not touch it. "You need that money for your fresh start." "I need my conscience clear more." He stood and picked up his hat. "Thank you again, Miss Monroe. I will not forget your kindness." He was halfway to the door when she spoke. "Dalton." He turned. It was the first time she had used his first name, and hearing it from her lips did something strange to his chest. "If you ever get that fresh start and you find yourself back this way, you would be welcome to stop by. I could use help sometimes, with the heavy work. I could not pay much, but I would feed you well." Dalton smiled, the first real smile he had felt in months. "I would like that, Laura. I truly would." He walked out to the corral and saddled his mare, who had recovered somewhat from the previous day's hard ride. As he led her out toward the desert, the sun broke over the horizon, flooding the landscape with golden light. Dalton looked back once and saw Laura standing on her porch, watching him go, and he raised his hand in farewell. She lifted hers in return, and then he was riding north, away from the only moment of peace he had known in 3 long years. Dalton kept to the high country for 2 weeks, avoiding towns and main roads, living on what he could hunt and the supplies he could buy from isolated ranches. He heard no news of the Holloway Gang, which could mean they had given up on him or that they were looking in a different direction. Either way, he began to relax slightly, to believe that he might actually escape his past and build something new. But the past had a way of catching up, as Dalton learned when he rode into a small mining camp in the mountains to buy supplies, and heard the name Jake Holloway being discussed by 3 miners sitting outside the general store. "I heard they robbed the bank in Barstow 2 days ago," one of them was saying. "Got away with nearly $5,000 and killed the sheriff when he tried to stop them." Dalton felt his blood run cold. The Holloway Gang had never killed before. That had been Jake's rule, because dead lawmen brought federal marshals and posses that did not quit. Something had changed, and Dalton had a sick feeling that he knew what it was. Jake Holloway was angry, and angry men made mistakes. "They say one of the gang turned on them," another miner added. "Holloway is offering $100 to anyone who brings him the man's head. That is cold. That is an outlaw for you, no loyalty except to money." Dalton bought his supplies quickly and rode out before anyone could look at him too closely. $100 was enough money to make even honest men consider betrayal, and he could not afford to be recognized. But more than his own safety, he found himself thinking about Laura Monroe, alone on her homestead, just a day's hard ride from Barstow. If the gang was in that area, and if they were desperate or angry enough to be killing lawmen, what would stop them from stumbling across her place? He told himself it was not his problem. She had a rifle and the sense to use it, and he had his own neck to save. He rode north for another day, putting more distance between himself and the gang's last known location. But at night, camped under the stars, he kept seeing Laura's face in the firelight, kept hearing her say outlaws eat supper too with that defiant kindness that suggested she had been hurt before, and had chosen to stay compassionate anyway. On the 3rd day, Dalton turned his horse around and headed south. He approached Laura's homestead in the late afternoon, coming in from the west where he could see the house and barn clearly. Everything looked peaceful, the chickens scratching in their pen, the horses grazing in the corral, smoke rising from the chimney. Dalton felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as he rode up to the house and dismounted. Laura came out onto the porch, and the surprise on her face was quickly replaced by something that might have been pleasure. "Dalton Drake, I did not expect to see you again so soon." "I did not expect to be back so soon," he admitted. "But I heard some things that worried me, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." "What kind of things?" He told her about the robbery in Barstow and the killing of the sheriff, about the price on his head and the change in the gang's behavior. As he spoke, he saw Laura's expression grow more serious, the wariness returning to her eyes. "You think they might come this way? I do not know. But Barstow is not far, And if they are moving through this territory, your place is isolated enough that they might see it as an easy target for supplies or fresh horses." He hesitated, then added, "I know I have got no right to ask this, and you have already done more for me than I deserved, but would you let me stay on for a while? Just until I am sure the danger has passed. I can help with the work around the place, and I am a good shot if it comes to trouble." Laura studied him for a long moment, and Dalton could see her weighing the risks. Having him here might protect her from the gang, but it also connected her to him, made her a target if they came looking. Finally, she nodded. "You can stay in the barn. Same rules as before. You work for your keep, and the first sign that you are bringing more trouble than help, you leave." "Agreed, agreed." She smiled slightly. "All right then. Put your horse up and come inside. I will fix us something to eat, and you can tell me what kind of work you are good at besides robbing stages." Over the next week, Dalton fell into a routine that felt more like a life than anything he had experienced in years. He rose with the sun and worked until dark, repairing the barn roof that had started to leak, fixing the corral fence, digging a new drainage ditch for the garden. Laura worked beside him much of the time, and he was impressed by her strength and competence. She could handle an axe as well as most men, could shoe a horse, could fix a harness with neat, tight stitches. In the evenings, they ate together at her table, and gradually the conversation moved beyond practical matters to more personal topics. He learned that she had grown up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress, that she had married Thomas Monroe when she was 18 and he was 20, and that they had headed west with dreams of building something that belonged to them alone. She had loved her husband, she said, but theirs had been a practical love, built on shared goals and mutual respect more than passion. When he died, she had grieved, but she had not broken, and she had been determined to honor his memory by making their dream succeed. Dalton told her about his own past, about growing up on a small ranch in Arizona, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 22, and then losing the ranch to debt when a drought killed half his cattle, and the bank refused to extend his loan. He told her about the bitterness and anger that had driven him to say yes when Jake Holloway offered him a place in the gang, about the slow erosion of his conscience as he convinced himself that robbing from the rich was justified, because they had robbed from him first. And he told her about the moment when he had looked at those children sleeping in their beds and realized that he had become someone his parents would not recognize. "It is not too late to change," Laura said quietly. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the desert in a blaze of red and gold. "You are still young, Dalton. You can build a different life." "I want to," he said, "but I do not know if I can outrun what I have done. The law might not be looking for me yet, but they will if Holloway keeps escalating, and even if they do not catch me, I will always know what I was." "What you were," Laura repeated. "Not what you are. You chose to stop, to risk your life to save people you did not even know. That counts for something." Dalton looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her dark hair and softened the strong lines of her face. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the obvious way of the saloon girls he had known, but in a way that went deeper, that had to do with strength and integrity and courage. And more than that, he was starting to feel things for her that went beyond gratitude, things that made his chest tight when she smiled and made him want to stay here forever, working this hard land and eating simple meals and talking about everything and nothing as the stars came out overhead. "Laura," he began, but she held up a hand. "Do not say anything you might regret later," she said softly. "We barely know each other, and you are still figuring out who you are now that you are not riding with outlaws. Just focus on the work and staying safe. The rest can wait." He knew she was right, but it did not make the wanting any less intense. Still, he nodded and changed the subject, and they talked of other things until the night grew cold and they retreated to their separate sleeping places. The trouble came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Dalton had returned to Laura's homestead. He was out by the barn, splitting wood for the winter stores, when he saw the dust cloud rising in the east, 3 riders moving fast. Dalton dropped the axe and ran for the house, his heart pounding. "Laura, riders coming," she appeared in the doorway with her rifle already in hand, her face calm but alert. "How many?" "3 that I can see." "Are they your gang?" "I cannot tell yet. Get inside and bar the door. Do not come out unless I call you." "This is my land, Dalton. I will not hide in my own house while you face danger alone." "Damn it, Laura, I am trying to keep you safe. And I am trying to keep us both alive." She moved past him onto the porch, the rifle ready. "If they are looking for you, having me out here might make them think twice about shooting. If they are just drifters, they will see 2 armed people instead of 1 and decide it is easier to move on." Dalton wanted to argue, but the riders were close enough now that he could make out details. His stomach dropped. He recognized the lead horse, a big bay gelding with white socks. Red Morgan, one of Holloway's lieutenants, and behind him were Charlie Stone and Pete Davis, both men he had ridden with and drunk with and considered friends until the day he had aimed his gun at their leader. "It is them," he said quietly. 3 of Holloway's men. "Laura, please get inside. They will not hurt you if you are not involved." "I am already involved," she said, but she moved behind him slightly, giving him the front position. "Be careful." The 3 riders slowed as they approached, stopping about 20 feet from the house. Red Morgan sat easy in the saddle, his hand resting on his gun butt, his weathered face breaking into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well now," Red drawled, "if it is not Dalton Drake, alive and well and playing farmer, we have been looking all over for you, boy." "Red, Charlie, Pete." Dalton kept his voice level, his hand near his own gun. "I do not want trouble. I am out of the gang and out of the life. Just ride on and tell Jake you did not find me." "Cannot do that, Dalton. Jake wants you dead and Jake pays our wages, so what Jake wants, Jake gets." Red's eyes flicked to Laura and back. "That your woman?" "I am nobody's woman," Laura said sharply before Dalton could answer. "This is my land and you are trespassing. State your business or leave." Red laughed, though the other 2 looked uncomfortable. "Got some fire to her, does she not?" "Listen, miss, we have got no quarrel with you. This is between us and Dalton here. You just go on inside and we will make this quick." "No," Dalton said flatly. "I am not drawing on you, Red. I am not drawing on any of you. You want to kill me, you are going to have to shoot me in cold blood and you will have a witness to say so." He turned on the gang. Charlie Stone spoke up, his voice uncertain. "That is the law we live by. A man turns on his own, he pays the price. I did not turn on anyone. I stopped a murder and there is a difference." Dalton took a step forward. "You know me, all of you. We rode together for 3 years. Have you ever known me to lie or cheat or go back on my word?" Pete Davis shifted in his saddle, looking distinctly unhappy. "No, Dalton. You were always straight with us." "Then believe me when I say I am done. I am not a threat to the gang. I am not going to the law. I just want to live quiet and work honest. Let me do that and you can tell Jake I was already dead when you found me. Tell him I fell off a cliff or got snake bit or whatever you want. He gets what he wants and nobody else has to die." "Jake would know we were lying," Red said, but some of the certainty had gone out of his voice. "He always knows." "Then tell him the truth. Tell him I was here with a witness, and you chose not to commit murder in front of her because that brings the kind of heat none of us need. Jake is smart enough to understand that." The 3 men looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Red sighed and straightened in his saddle. You got lucky today, Dalton. Lucky that I am not much interested in killing a man over a point of pride, and lucky that the lady is standing there watching. But Jake is not going to forget this. You might have run far enough to be out of his reach for now, but if you ever come back into territory he considers his, he will kill you without a second thought. You understand me? I understand. Good. Red tipped his hat to Laura. Apologies for the intrusion, miss. You might want to think about the company you keep, though. This man is poison to anyone who cares about him. Then he turned his horse and rode off, Charlie and Pete following. Dalton watched until they disappeared into the heat shimmer of the desert, hardly daring to believe they were really leaving. Beside him, Laura lowered her rifle, her hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline wearing off. "Are you all right?" Dalton asked, turning to her. "I am fine. Are you?" "I am alive, which is more than I expected when I saw Red's horse." He reached out without thinking and took her hand, needing the contact, needing to feel something solid and real. "Thank you for standing with me. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Laura squeezed his fingers, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with emotion. "You came back here to protect me, even though it put you in danger. Did you think I would just hide inside while they killed you? I wanted you safe. I am safer with you alive." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And I wanted you alive for more than just safety." Dalton felt his heart skip. "Laura, I know what I said before, about waiting and not saying things we might regret. But when I saw those men ride up and I thought they might kill you, I realized that I would regret waiting more than I would regret speaking." She took a breath, her hand still in his. "I care about you, Dalton Drake, more than I expected to, and more than is probably wise. You have been here less than a month, but you have made me remember what it is like to not be alone, to have someone to talk to and work beside and trust. I do not know what that means or where it can go, but I wanted you to know." Dalton felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked down and buried for so long he had forgotten it existed. "I care about you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I have from the first night when you said outlaws eat supper too, and gave me kindness I did not deserve. Laura, I am not a good bet. I have got a price on my head and a reputation that will follow me, and I have got almost nothing to offer you except hard work and honest intentions. But if you are willing to take a chance on me, I swear I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." Laura smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look younger and happier and so beautiful that Dalton's breath caught. "I am not looking for a perfect man, Dalton. I am looking for a good one, and I think you might just qualify." He kissed her then, there on the porch with the sun beating down and the desert stretching out forever in all directions. It was a gentle kiss, careful and sweet, but it held all the promise of something deeper, something that could grow into love if they were brave enough to let it. When they pulled apart, Laura was flushed and smiling, and Dalton felt like he could take on the world. "We should go inside," Laura said softly. "I think we have both had enough excitement for one day." They spent the rest of that day working side by side in a comfortable silence, but something had shifted between them. Some barrier had come down. They touched more casually now, his hand on her back as he passed behind her, her fingers brushing his as she handed him tools. At supper, they sat closer together at the table, and when the meal was done and the dishes washed, Dalton did not immediately retreat to the barn. Instead, they sat on the porch together as the stars came out, talking quietly about their hopes and fears and dreams for the future. "I want to expand the garden next year," Laura said. "Put in more vegetables that I can sell in town. And maybe get a few more chickens, build up a proper egg business." "That is a good plan. We could build a better chicken coop, something more secure against predators. Laura looked at him with a raised eyebrow and a small smile. Dalton felt his face heat. If you want me to stay, that is. I know we are still figuring this out, but I would like to be here, help you build this place into something real. If you will have me. I will have you, Laura said, and the simplicity of it, the certainty in her voice, made Dalton's chest tight with gratitude and joy. They courted slowly over the following months, learning each other's rhythms and habits and moods. Dalton proved himself a tireless worker, up before dawn to tend the animals and out in the fields until dusk, repairing and improving everything he touched. Laura taught him about growing vegetables in the desert soil, about reading the weather and conserving water, about the 100 small skills required to make a life in this hard country. They argued sometimes, both of them stubborn and used to making their own decisions, but they learned to compromise, to talk through their disagreements instead of letting resentment build. In September, Dalton rode with Laura into Mojave, California to sell her produce and eggs. It was the first time he had been to a town since joining her, and he was nervous about being recognized, but Laura's presence seemed to give him legitimacy. They were just another young couple trying to make a go of it on a desert homestead, and nobody looked at them twice. On the way back, Dalton bought Laura a length of blue fabric from the general store, and the smile on her face when he presented it to her was worth more to him than all the money he had ever stolen. By October, when the worst of the heat had broken and the nights turned cold, Dalton had moved from the barn to the house. They were not yet sleeping in the same bed. The proprieties still mattered even out here, but he had a bedroll by the stove, and they spent their evenings together in comfort, reading by lamplight or playing cards or simply talking. Laura told him stories about her childhood in Missouri, about her stern but loving father and her mother who could make any fabric into a work of art. Dalton told her about his parents, about growing up on the Arizona ranch and learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the pride his father had taken in their small herd and the devastation when the drought killed them. "You ever think about going back?" Laura asked one night. "To Arizona, I mean, trying to reclaim your family's land." Dalton was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I used to dream about it all the time. It was what I told myself I was working toward, every robbery I did with the gang. But the truth is, that place is gone. The bank sold it years ago, and whoever owns it now has as much right to it as I did. And more than that, I am not that person anymore. That boy who lost his ranch and got angry and made bad choices. I am someone different now, or at least I am trying to be. And this place, your place, it feels more like home than anywhere I have been in years." Laura reached out and took his hand. "It could be your place too, you know, if you wanted it to be. Are you asking me to marry you, Laura Monroe?" She laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the months passed and she relaxed into the relationship. "I might be. Or I might be waiting for you to ask me properly, with all the traditional fumbling and nerves that come with it." Dalton grinned, his heart suddenly pounding. "I do not have a ring. I do not need a ring. I need a partner, someone who will work beside me and stand with me and build a life with me. Someone honest and kind and brave enough to change when change is needed. Do you think you could be that person?" "I am already trying to be," Dalton said seriously. "Laura, I love you. I have loved you for months, maybe from the beginning, and it has scared me half to death because I did not think I deserved it. But you make me want to be better, to be the kind of man who deserves a woman like you. So yes, I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to make this place ours, to build something together that will last." "Yes," Laura said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married in November by a traveling preacher who came through Mojave once a month. It was a simple ceremony, just the two of them and the preacher and a couple of witnesses from town, but it felt more sacred to Dalton than anything he had experienced. When he slipped the plain gold band onto Laura's finger, bought with money from selling his horse and saddle and gun, he felt the last piece of his old life fall away. He was no longer an outlaw or a thief or a man running from his past. He was a husband, a homesteader, a man with a future. Their first year of marriage was hard but happy. Dalton proved to have a knack for working with horses, and he started a small business on the side, breaking and training young horses for ranchers in the area. Laura's egg and vegetable business grew, and by the following summer, they had saved enough money to buy a milk cow and start selling butter and cheese as well. The homestead thrived under their combined efforts, and slowly the house grew more comfortable, more filled with the small luxuries that made a place feel like home. In the spring of 1885, Laura told Dalton she was pregnant. He reacted with a mixture of joy and terror, thrilled at the idea of a child but terrified that he would somehow fail as a father, that his past would taint the innocent life growing inside her. But Laura had faith in him, absolute and unwavering, and it helped him believe in himself. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with dark hair and gray-green eyes like his mother. They named him Thomas, after Laura's first husband, and Dalton felt no jealousy in the gesture. Thomas Monroe had loved Laura and had given his life building the foundation of the homestead they now shared. It was right to honor that, to acknowledge that love could be layered and complex and big enough to hold more than one truth. Fatherhood changed Dalton in ways he had not expected. Holding his son for the first time, feeling the tiny fingers wrap around his own, he understood in a visceral way what he had nearly become, what he had nearly lost. If he had stayed with the Holloway Gang, if he had let himself become the kind of man who could hurt innocents, he would never have known this moment. He would have died badly, shot down by lawmen or betrayed by his own gang, and he would have left nothing good behind him. "Thank you," he whispered to Laura as she slept, exhausted from the birth, the baby tucked into the crook of her arm. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for seeing who I could be instead of who I was." The years passed with the steady rhythm of seasons and work. Young Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed Dalton everywhere, imitating his father's walk and gestures with hilarious seriousness. In the summer of 1887, Laura gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Mary after Dalton's mother. She had her father's dark hair and smile, and she was more daring than her brother, always trying to climb higher and run faster and test the boundaries of what was allowed. The homestead continued to prosper. Dalton's horse training business had grown to the point where ranchers from as far away as San Bernardino were bringing him their difficult horses, trusting his patience and skill. Laura's produce and dairy business had expanded as well, and they had hired a young hand to help with the heavy work during busy seasons. They were not rich, not by any measure, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were content. Dalton had occasional nightmares about his time with the Holloway Gang, nights when he woke in a cold sweat, convinced that Red Morgan or Jake Holloway himself was standing over their bed with a gun. But Laura was always there, grounding him with her calm presence, reminding him that the past was the past and could not hurt them unless he let it. And gradually, the nightmares became less frequent, until months would go by without one. In 1889, news reached them that Jake Holloway had been killed in a shootout with federal marshals in Colorado. The gang had been broken up, its members scattered or imprisoned or dead, and the reign of terror they had inflicted on the Southwest was finally over. When Dalton heard the news, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the threat was truly gone, sadness for the waste of life and potential, and gratitude that he had gotten out when he did. "You ever regret it?" Laura asked him that night as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard before supper. "Leaving the gang, choosing this life instead?" "Not even for a moment," Dalton said honestly. "This life, this family, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You saved me, Laura. You and those words you said that first night. Outlaws eat supper too. You saw something in me worth saving when I could not see it myself." "You saved yourself," Laura corrected gently. "You made the choice to stop, to walk away from that life. I just gave you a place to land." "You gave me everything," Dalton said, reaching for her hand. "A home, a purpose, a reason to be better. Children who will never have to know the man I used to be. That is not just a place to land. That is grace." Laura leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Thomas was trying to teach Mary how to skip stones in the water trough, even though she was still too young to understand, and the sound of their laughter floated on the evening air. By 1891, the Drake family was well established in the community around Mojave, California. Dalton had been asked to join the town council, a sign of how completely he had been accepted despite his past. He had been hesitant at first, worried that someone might recognize him or that his history would come to light, but Laura had encouraged him. "People knew him now," she had said. They knew his character, his work ethic, his honesty. Whatever he had been before did not matter as much as who he was now. She had been right. Dalton served on the council for 2 years, helping to mediate disputes between ranchers and homesteaders, working to bring a proper schoolhouse to the area so the children would not have to ride so far for education. He was respected, even liked, and the irony of an ex-outlaw becoming a pillar of the community was not lost on him. In the spring of 1893, Laura became pregnant again, and that autumn she gave birth to twin boys. They named them Daniel and David, and they brought a new level of chaos to the household. Thomas, now 8 years old, tried to be helpful, while Mary at 6 was more interested in treating the babies like dolls she could dress up and parade around. Dalton and Laura navigated the exhaustion and joy of having 4 young children with humor and patience, relying on each other, and the deep well of love they had built over the years. The homestead had grown significantly by this time. They had expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor for receiving guests. The barn had been rebuilt larger and stronger, and they now kept a dozen horses, several cows, pigs, and a large flock of chickens. The garden had been expanded to nearly 2 acres, and they employed 2 full-time hands to help with the work. It was a far cry from the simple, struggling homestead Dalton had first stumbled upon 10 years earlier, but it had been built with love and sweat and honest labor, and that made it precious. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1895, Dalton took Laura into Mojave for a rare night away from the children, leaving them in the care of their hired hands and neighbors. He had saved money for months to afford a stay at the small hotel and a dinner at the nicest restaurant the town had to offer. It was not fancy by city standards, but to them, it felt luxurious. "You remember the first meal we shared?" Dalton asked as they ate. "You made me stew and cornbread, and I thought it was the best thing I had ever tasted." "I remember you looked like you had not eaten in a week," Laura said with a smile. "And I remember being terrified that you might rob me or worse, but also knowing somehow that you would not. There was something in your eyes, some core of decency that had not been corrupted yet. You took a big risk, letting me stay. The best risk I ever took. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I have never regretted it, not once. Even in the hard times, even when money was tight and the work was endless and I was so tired I could barely stand, I have never wished for a different life. You are my partner, Dalton, in every sense of the word. You are my best friend and the love of my life, and I thank God for the day you found my door." Dalton felt tears prick his eyes, something that would have embarrassed him in his younger days but which he no longer tried to hide. "I was running from death when I found you, but what I found instead was life. Real life, the kind worth living. I will love you until my last breath, Laura Drake, and probably beyond that." They finished their meal and walked through the quiet streets of Mojave, hand in hand under the stars, talking about their children and their plans for the future and all the small, precious details that made up their shared existence. It was not dramatic or exciting, but it was real and it was theirs, and that made it perfect. The turn of the century brought changes to the Southwest. The railroads had expanded, bringing more people and commerce. The age of the cowboy and the outlaw was fading, replaced by a more settled, civilized society. Dalton watched these changes with mixed feelings, grateful that his children were growing up in a safer, more prosperous world, but sometimes nostalgic for the wild freedom of his youth, even if that freedom had led him down dark paths. Thomas, their eldest, grew into a serious young man with a talent for numbers and a desire to study engineering. Dalton and Laura scraped together the money to send him to school in Los Angeles, proud and heartbroken in equal measure to see him leave. Mary proved to have her mother's business acumen and her father's way with horses, and by the time she was 15, she was running much of the homestead's commercial operations. The twins, Daniel and David, were inseparable, always scheming and getting into trouble together, but they were good-hearted and hard-working when they needed to be. In 1903, Dalton received word that Red Morgan had died of pneumonia in a charity hospital in Denver. Of all the members of the Holloway Gang, Red had been the one Dalton had respected most, and he felt a genuine sadness at the news. He wondered sometimes what Red's life had been like after the gang broke up, whether he had found any peace or redemption, or whether he had simply drifted until death found him. It could easily have been Dalton's own fate, he knew, if he had not stumbled onto Laura's homestead that night in 1883. Laura found him that evening, standing alone by the corral and staring out at the desert. She did not say anything, just slipped her hand into his and stood beside him, her presence a comfort and a reminder that he had chosen differently, had built differently, had lived differently than the men he once rode with. "I have been thinking," Dalton said finally, "about what we leave behind when we are gone. Red Morgan is dead, and I doubt anyone mourned him much. He had no family, no home, nothing but a reputation as an outlaw and a life wasted. But me, I have all this." He gestured at the homestead, the house where his children slept, the land he and Laura had built together. "I have a legacy that matters, children who will remember me and hopefully speak well of me, work that improved this place and helped this community. And I have you, always you, the best part of everything I am." "You have more than that," Laura said softly. "You have the example of what it means to change, to choose better, to not let your worst moments define you. That matters, Dalton. Our children will grow up knowing that people can make mistakes and still be good, that redemption is possible if you are brave enough to take it. That is a powerful legacy." Dalton turned to her, this woman who had given him everything, and pulled her into his arms. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and he felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built together, for every hard day and joyful moment, for every meal shared and child raised and challenge overcome. The years continued to roll by, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with a life well lived. Thomas graduated from engineering school and took a job with the railroad, designing bridges and track systems. Mary married a rancher's son from a neighboring property, a good man who treated her with respect and love, and they built a house just a few miles from the original homestead. The twins eventually took over the day-to-day operations of the Drake homestead, working together as they had always done, expanding the horse training business into one of the most respected in Southern California. Dalton and Laura, now in their 50s, stepped back gradually from the heavy work, taking on advisory roles and enjoying their grandchildren as they began to arrive. They had built something that would outlast them, a family enterprise rooted in honest labor and strong values, and they took deep satisfaction in seeing it thrive. On a warm evening in June of 1914, as they approached their 31st year of marriage, Dalton and Laura sat on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sun set over the Mojave Desert. They were older now, their hair gray and their hands weathered by decades of work, but the love between them had only deepened with time, becoming something as solid and enduring as the desert itself. "You remember the night we met?" Laura asked, her hand in his as always. "Every detail," Dalton said. "You came out with that rifle pointed at my chest, and I thought you might shoot me just on principle. And then you said those words that changed my life. Outlaws eat supper too." "I was arguing with myself as much as telling you," Laura admitted. "Part of me wanted to send you away to protect myself and my property. But I had been so lonely since Thomas died, and there was something about you, some quality I could not quite name, that made me want to take the risk. I am glad you did, more glad than I can ever say." Dalton lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me a life, Laura. Not just saved my life, though you did that too, but gave me a real life worth living. You gave me purpose and love and a reason to be better than I was. Everything good in me started the night I knocked on your door." "You always had good in you," Laura said firmly. "I just gave you a place where it could grow. The choice to change, to be better, that was all you." They sat in comfortable silence, as the sky turned from gold to rose to purple, the first stars beginning to appear overhead. Around them, the homestead hummed with life, the sound of horses in the corral, chickens settling for the night, their grandson calling to his brother somewhere in the distance. It was the sound of family, of continuity, of a life well lived. "I love you, Dalton Drake," Laura said softly. "I have loved you for 31 years, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Laura Drake," Dalton replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. Thank you for taking a chance on a too gentle outlaw who stumbled onto your porch. Thank you for staying," Laura said simply. As the stars emerged in full glory overhead, spreading across the desert sky in countless brilliant points of light, Dalton reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought him here. He had lost his family ranch and made terrible choices in his anger and desperation. He had ridden with outlaws and stolen, and lived in a way that shamed him to remember. But he had also found the courage to stop, to stand up for what was right even when it meant turning on his own gang, and that courage had led him to Laura's door on a hot June night in 1883. She had seen something in him worth saving, some spark of decency that had not been extinguished by his time with the Holloway Gang, and she had offered him kindness when he deserved nothing. That single act of grace had changed the trajectory of his entire life, had given him the chance to become the man he was always meant to be. Together, They had built a home, raised children, created a legacy of honest work and strong values that would outlast them both. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and joys. Dalton and Laura would grow old together, watching their grandchildren grow and eventually welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. They would face illness and loss, as all people must, but they would face it together, their bond strengthened by decades of shared life and unwavering commitment. The Drake homestead would continue to thrive, passed down through the generations as a testament to what two people could build when they chose love and hard work over bitterness and revenge. The story of how it began, with an outlaw stumbling onto a widow's porch and finding redemption in a bowl of stew and a few simple words, would become family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of the power of mercy and second chances. But on this particular evening in June of 1914, with the desert cooling around them and the stars bright overhead, Dalton and Laura simply sat together in the peaceful darkness, holding hands and savoring the quiet joy of a life shared. They had built something beautiful together, something that would endure long after they were gone, and they were content. In the years that followed, Dalton lived to see his 72nd birthday, passing peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1923 with Laura at his side. She followed him 2 years later, her heart simply giving out one morning as she worked in the garden she had tended for over 40 years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the homestead, under a sky so wide and blue it seemed to go on forever. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, 3 generations of Drakes who had all been shaped in some way by the choice Dalton made on that June night in 1883 to turn away from violence and toward something better. They told stories about their grandparents, about Dalton's patience with difficult horses and his gentle guidance of his children, about Laura's strength and business acumen and unwavering love. And they told the story of how they met, of the outlaw who was too gentle for his own gang finding his way to a widow's door, of her looking at him and saying those transformative words, "Outlaws eat supper too." It was a love story, pure and simple. A story of redemption and second chances, of two people finding each other in the vast emptiness of the desert and building something that would last. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that it is never too late to change, never too late to choose better, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And it all started with a knock on a door, a rifle pointed at a stranger's chest, and a woman brave enough to offer kindness when the world would have forgiven her for offering nothing at all. The desert remembers such things, holding them in its vast silence, and the homestead that Dalton and Laura built together still stands today, occupied by their descendants, a testament to the enduring power of love and the grace that can be found in the simplest acts of human compassion. The legacy they left was not measured in money or fame, but in the lives they touched and the family they raised, and the example they set of what it means to love truly and live honestly. Dalton Drake had been an outlaw once, a man running from death and justice both. But he died a husband, a father, a grandfather, a respected member of his community, and a man who had proven that the past does not have to define the future. And it all began with those 4 simple words, spoken by a widow to a stranger in the fading light of a desert evening. "Outlaws eat supper too." Those words became a family motto of sorts, a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance, that mercy is not weakness, and that the simple act of seeing the humanity in another person can change the course of a life. Dalton and Laura's great-grandchildren would grow up hearing that phrase and understanding the weight it carried, the history it represented, the love story it encapsulated. The Mojave Desert continued its eternal existence, unchanged by the small human drama that had played out on its surface. But for those who knew the story, for those who walked the land that Dalton and Laura had claimed and tamed and loved, the desert seemed somehow kinder, as if it too remembered the night a too gentle outlaw found redemption at a widow's door. In the end, that is what matters most. Not the mistakes we make or the wrong paths we wander down, but the courage to turn back toward the light, to accept the grace that is offered, and to build something good from the ashes of what was. Dalton Drake did that. Laura Monroe Drake did that. Together, they created a life that was richer and more meaningful than either could have imagined on that hot June night in 1883 when fate brought them together. Their love story was not perfect or easy. There were hard times and struggles, disappointments and losses along the way. But through it all, they held fast to each other and to the values they had built their life upon: honesty, hard work, compassion, and the unwavering belief that people can change if given the chance and the support to do so. As the sun set on their lives and rose on those of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the story of Dalton and Laura continued to inspire. It became a touchstone for the family, a reminder that love is a choice we make every day, that redemption is always possible, and that sometimes the most transformative moments in our lives begin with the simplest acts of kindness. The homestead they built together stood as a monument to all of this, its walls holding the echoes of laughter and tears, of births and deaths, of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. It was a place of belonging and safety, built by two people who understood the value of both because they had lived without them. And at the heart of it all was that first meal shared, that bowl of stew and piece of cornbread offered by a woman who chose to see the potential for good in a man's society, had written off as lost. Outlaws eat supper too. 4 simple words that acknowledged the humanity in everyone, that recognized that people are more than their worst choices, that opened the door to possibility and hope and love. Those words saved Dalton Drake's life. And in saving him, they set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through generations, touching countless lives and creating a legacy that would endure long after the people who started it were gone. It was a small kindness in a hard world, a moment of grace in an unforgiving landscape, and it changed everything. That is the power of love, the power of mercy, the power of seeing another person truly and offering them not judgment but the chance to be better. Dalton and Laura proved that such chances are not wasted, that the faith we place in others can be rewarded, and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with passion, but with simple human decency. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and memory, and the continuation of life in those they left behind. But it was a good ending, a full ending, an ending that closed the circle and brought everything to a place of peace and resolution. They had lived well and loved deeply and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask of a life? And so the story of the cowboy too gentle for his own gang, who found a widow's door in the desert and was told that outlaws eat supper too, comes to its close. It is a story of redemption and love, of second chances and hard-won happiness, of two people who found each other in the vastness of the American West and built something that would last forever. It is a story that reminds us all that we are capable of change, that love is the most transformative force in the universe, and that sometimes the most important journey we can take is the one that leads us home. Dalton and Laura Drake lived that truth every day of their long marriage, and their descendants continue to honor it even now, generations later, on the land they claimed, and the homestead they built together. The desert has not changed, but the people who crossed it were transformed, and that transformation echoes still, a testament to the enduring power of love and the grace that can be found when we choose to see the best in each other, rather than the worst. Their love story was written in the hard work of building a life together, in the quiet moments shared on the porch at sunset, in the laughter of children and grandchildren, in the everyday acts of partnership and support and unwavering commitment. It was not a story of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though there were moments of both. Instead, it was a story of two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, building something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials of hope and effort and love. And it all began with 4 words spoken in kindness to a stranger. "Outlaws, eat supper too." Those words opened a door to possibility, and through that door walked a love story for the ages, a testament to the transformative power of mercy and the enduring strength of 2 hearts joined in common purpose. Dalton and Laura Drake lived that story with courage and grace, and their legacy continues to inspire all who hear it. A reminder that it is never too late to change, never too late to love, and never too late to become the person we were always meant to be.